Hey everybody, happy Halloween, and it's time for another Mini Mondays. Today I'm going to be talking about Scary Godmother. Now, originally I was going to do an entire EyeofSol review for this, but I found that after watching it I just didn't have a whole lot to say about it, so we're just gonna put it in Mini Mondays because a lot of people really wanted me to talk about it. So yeah, this is an animated short that's based off the series of books and comics of the same name, Scary Godmother, and the short was produced in 2003 by Mainframe Entertainment. So, what is the plot of this short? Well, it's about these four kids, Jimmy, Bert, Daryl, and Katie, who forced Jimmy's little cousin Hannah into a spook house on Halloween night to basically scare the shit out of her. And their plan sort of backfires when they find out they can't get any candy because they have to wait for her. So Hannah, because she's scared shitless, has her scary godmother appear to her and take her away to the fright side where she can have a big party with a bunch of monsters. And, yeah, that's kind of it. You know, it just sort of stops at the party, everything plot-wise. So, truth be told, this isn't the worst plot ever. I do think it's kind of cool to have all these monsters together in a party setting. It's okay. I mean, for a basic Halloween short, I don't have any major complaints. What I do complain about, though, is the characters. So Jimmy, Bert, Daryl, and Katie, the kids, they're more of a framing device as opposed to characters. They just sort of sit around and wait for shit to happen. And, I mean, they're not terrible. They're performed well enough by their child actors. I have no major complaints with that. It's just, you would think that they were the focus of the story because it kind of sets it up that way. But then it turns out Hannah is actually the star of the show, the little girl, who basically just stands around and screams at shit until she stops screaming at shit. And, again, truthfully, she could be a lot worse. She's a little girl in an animated short. She could be really annoying, but she's okay, other than the screaming and the monster kind of thing gets a little annoying. But the stars of the show are really the monsters. And Scary Godmother is cool, I guess, and Scully, the big flamboyant skeleton, I think is pretty awesome, to be honest. Bugaboo, big scary guy who's under the beds, scaring children. He's alright, if a little bit traditional. The vampires are okay, I guess. And the werewolf's pretty annoying, to be honest. And he's wearing a shirt like those sheeps that used to be on the exploding sheep screensaver on old computers that my dad really liked. I know that's a random observation, but anyway. Yeah, so the characters, overall, I can't complain too much. They're okay. One good thing I have to say about this short is that it does have a nice energy to it. To be fair, the plot progression does have a very disjointed feel to it where it sort of stops and starts repeatedly. When it gets to the party, everything just sort of grinds to a halt. But when it's actually moving and doing stuff, the energy I feel is kind of cool. It does have sort of a Halloween-y kind of vibe to it, which, yeah, I'd say is good. You know, it's the sort of thing you'd put on in the background of a Halloween party, one you'd have yourself, which I think is pretty cool. But to be honest, it's hard to say anything good about it because the 3D animation is just terrifying. Like, it's not horrid, it's not like Video Brinkado or anything, but it's scary in its own way. I mean, you gotta try hard to do beady eyes in 3D properly, and they didn't do it. By the end, it tries to take on this cartoony aesthetic, and it just doesn't work with the creepy, janky, weird style of animation that they're using. So that's the scariest thing by far, is just, ugh. It reminds me of Reboot, which was one of my childhood terrors, so yeah, I'm not a big fan of that. And also, like I said, it's got a really weird, disjointed plot progression, and it doesn't really have a moral, exactly. Now, not everything has to have a moral, doesn't really matter, but it's kind of setting itself up like it's trying to tell a big moral, and I guess you could argue that the moral is don't judge a book by its cover, and blah blah blah. But I just feel like the moral that it says, the main one, is don't fuck with your little cousin or else she'll sick a bunch of monsters on you. Which is a weird moral, for sure. It's definitely not traditional. So, overall, I would say that this is something that I'd recommend, but only on Halloween, because it does have a cool, Halloween-y sort of storybook aesthetic that I think is appealing, but watching it any other time, I just don't think it's worth it. You can enjoy it for the pure Halloween aesthetic that it has, but I can't think of any reason to watch it anytime else, you know? So it's not necessarily bad. I mean, it does have a cool sort of holiday-ish vibe to it, but then again, it's not very good because it's really terrifying to look at, and not genuine fear like PT or Amnesia or something like that, but just creep out at the terrible animation quality. So yeah, as a Halloween thing, I'd recommend it, but as a general piece of animation, I don't think I'd recommend it. And that's all I have to say about that. I think the reason why I have such sort of an uncertain sort of idea of this whole thing is because when I first saw this on TV back in 2003, I had strep throat at the time. It's the only time I ever had strep throat, and when I watched it, I had a fairly high fever at the time, so I remember this being really trippy in my own head. Like, when I thought back to this short, I remember it being really trippy, but it was probably because of the fever. So watching it without strep throat, without a fever, it's not nearly as trippy, but it's still very scary with the animation.